was 2014, and I had just started working the overnight shift at a 24-hour pharmacy in a small town in Illinois. It wasn't glamorous, but I needed the money. I was 27, broke, recently divorced, and trying to piece my life back together. The night shift was lonely and exhausting, but it gave me a strange kind of peace. The store was usually empty after midnight, except for the occasional drunk or late-night prescription pickup. I spent most nights stocking shelves, cleaning, or pretending to be busy behind the counter. The store sat near the edge of town, close to the woods. Not dense forest, but enough trees to block out light and make everything around it seem a little darker than it should. There was a street lamp outside, but it flickered constantly. Everything about the place had this quiet, unsettling vibe at night. I ignored it at first. You have to, or you'll go crazy. One night, around 12:45 a.m., I was restocking the drinks in the fridge at the back of the store when I heard the automatic doors at the front open. That wasn't unusual. What was strange was that I hadn't heard footsteps. No jingling keys, no shuffling on the tile, no coughing or the sound of a shopping cart. Just the doors sliding open, and then nothing. I peeked down the aisle but saw no one. I walked to the front. Still no one. The doors had closed behind whoever had entered, but the store was silent. I waited behind the register for a few minutes, assuming someone was just grabbing something and would show up to check out. After 10 minutes, I got uneasy. I walked around the store, each aisle, each corner. No one. I checked the bathroom doors. Both were unlocked and empty. I went outside and looked around. The parking lot was empty. The only car there was mine. I started to wonder if the doors had just opened on their own. That happens sometimes when the sensors glitched, especially on windy nights. But it wasn't windy. When I got back inside, a small box of cough drops had been placed on the counter. I hadn't seen it before. I know I hadn't. I was staring at that counter for 10 minutes. I looked at the doors again. Still closed. No sign of anyone. I picked up the cough drops, walked to the front door, and peered outside again. That's when I saw the figure. It was standing just outside the flickering light of the street lamp, partially obscured by the trees. Tall, unmoving. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person. I froze, staring. The figure took a single step forward. I backed up quickly and locked the doors. A few minutes passed. I kept glancing outside, but the figure was gone. Or maybe it never was there. I started to convince myself it was just a shadow. A trick of the light. I was tired. My mind was playing games with me. That's what I told myself until the phone rang. It was the landline, hardwired behind the counter. We rarely used it. It was mostly for internal calls from the corporate office. When I picked up, there was silence. Then breathing. Slow, deep breathing, like someone was holding the receiver close to their face, not saying anything, just letting me hear them breathe. I hung up. Shook it off. But the phone rang again. Immediately. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times that night. I unplugged it. The next night, I debated calling off work, but I needed the paycheck. I went in around 10:30 p.m., as usual. Everything was fine for a while. Around midnight, I was sweeping near the back when I heard the door chime again. I rushed to the front. No one there. But this time, there were muddy footprints. Bare feet. Right at the entrance. Leading inside about 10 steps, then just stopping. They didn't go down any aisle, didn't lead back outside. They just ended in the middle of the floor. I followed them, trying to understand how they could have just stopped. I even checked the security footage. The cameras were old and grainy, but I pulled up the timestamp. I watched the footage from a few minutes before. The doors slid open on their own. No one entered, just air. Then the footprints appeared, one by one, as if something invisible was walking across the tile. I stared at the screen for a long time, then shut it off. The rest of the shift was a blur. I stayed behind the counter, gripping the bat we kept under the register. The next morning, when the day manager came in, I told her what happened. She laughed at first. Then she said something that I still think about today. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She nodded slowly. "You're not the first." I asked what she meant. She hesitated before answering. Back in '95, before it was a pharmacy, this place used to be a diner. There was a guy who came in every night around 1 a.m., tall guy, always wore a long coat, never spoke, just sat at the same booth and stared out the window. One night, he got up, Walked into the bathroom and never came out. They searched everywhere. But the weird part, there were muddy footprints. Bare feet, just like you said. No one could explain it. I thought she was messing with me. I wanted her to be. But something about the way she said it, the flatness in her voice, told me she believed it. I kept working there. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't have anywhere else to go. For the next few weeks, things stayed quiet. No strange noises, no figures outside, until the night of December 18th. That night, I was alone again. It was bitter cold, and the lot outside was icy. No one came in for hours. I was behind the counter, scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint tapping. Not from the doors, from behind me. I turned around. The sound was coming from the office door. The office was locked. I had the only key. No one had been in there all night. The tapping stopped. Then 3 knocks. I opened the door slowly. The office was empty, except the computer monitor was on. I had turned it off hours earlier. It displayed a black screen with 1 sentence in white text. He never left. I backed out slowly, shut the door, and called the police. They came, checked the building. No one inside. No signs of forced entry. They said it was probably a prank, maybe a virus. The computer had no sign of the message when they checked it. I quit the next day. I didn't give notice. I packed up and left town within a week. I don't talk about this often. People assume you're making it up or you've lost your mind. But I wasn't the only one. I later learned that 2 other employees had reported seeing the same footprints. One even claimed she saw a man in the freezer, standing there, smiling. There was never any break-in, no rational explanation. But the pattern was always the same. Just after midnight, the doors open by themselves, the phone rings, and someone walks in, but never walks out. Story the end. It was a little past midnight, the first time I saw the man. Not in a nightmare, not in a shadow, but standing in the middle of the road. I was driving home from my older cousin's house about 20 minutes outside of town. It was late, and the roads were empty, just stretches of cracked pavement winding through thick tree lines, the occasional broken-down billboard or flickering street lamp punctuating the dark. I always took the long way home, past Old Mill Road, because it was more peaceful, quieter. But that night, the silence pressed too hard, like the trees were listening. It started when my headlights caught a shape ahead. I thought it was a deer at first, so I slowed down. But as I got closer, I saw him, a man, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. He was barefoot, shirtless, wearing what looked like torn pajama pants. His chest was covered in deep scratches, old and fresh, and he was staring directly at my car, or through it. I slammed the brakes and stopped 20 feet away. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought I might break it. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. I blinked, looked away for half a second to check my phone for a signal. No bars, of course. And when I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. No rustling in the woods, no footsteps, no sound. I sat there with the engine idling for what felt like forever before I eased the car forward. The road was empty. No sign anyone had been there. I convinced myself I was tired, exhausted. Maybe I'd imagined it. That kind of thing happens on these roads. Trick of the lights, shadows playing with you. Except the next morning, I found deep scratches on the driver's side door. 3 long gouges, like something with claws had dragged them down the side of the car. I tried to forget it, went to work, laughed it off when I told the story. Probably a raccoon, I said, or a branch I didn't notice. But part of me knew better. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept feeling like someone was outside my window. My room faces the backyard, which backs into woods. I live alone in a small 1-story house about 15 minutes from the town center, just far enough away to feel too isolated when it's dark. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because the silence felt wrong. Thick, like someone had muffled the world. I stared at the ceiling, then turned my head toward the window. There were 2 pale eyes looking in. I didn't scream, didn't move. I couldn't. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. His eyes didn't blink, didn't shift, and then they were gone. I rushed outside with a flashlight, barefoot, heart slamming so hard it hurt. There were no footprints in the grass. Nothing disturbed, but the window pane had 3 fresh smudges on it, like someone had pressed their fingers against the glass. I started locking everything, every window, every door. Not that I didn't before, but now I checked everything twice, sometimes 3 times. I bought a cheap security camera and mounted it over the front door. The third night, something new happened. It was exactly 12:47 a.m. when I heard a knock. Not a loud one, just soft, like fingertips. Tap, tap, tap. I froze in bed. The knock came again. Tap. It wasn't the front door. It was inside. I stood up, slow, grabbed the bat I kept near the bed. The knock came again from the hallway. I turned on the light. The hallway was empty. Then I noticed the attic door was open. I don't use the attic. It's just insulation and exposed beams. I grabbed a chair and stepped up to push the door shut. As I did, I looked up. There were fingernails scratched into the wood. Fresh. Deep. Curling into the beams like someone had been digging their way down. I shut it, bolted it. Next day, I called in sick to work and installed more cameras. One in the hallway, one facing the backyard. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on the couch, lights on, holding the bat. Around midnight, the power cut. I tried the flashlight. It flickered and died. Everything went silent. Even the crickets outside stopped. And then I heard breathing. Deep, slow. Inside the house. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere. Like the walls were breathing. I sat perfectly still, every muscle in my body clenched. Then the breathing stopped. A whisper followed. Low. Male. Not from my own head. From the room. I know you're awake. I couldn't tell if it came from behind the couch or the hallway. I didn't move. Eventually, the power came back on. The lights flickered to life. My TV turned on by itself, static buzzing at full volume. I yanked the plug, checked the cameras. Nothing. Just me, sitting there. But in one frame, one still image I hadn't noticed before, there was something. A tall, thin man, just barely visible in the background, standing at the end of the hallway, facing the wall, barefoot, shirtless. I called the police. They came, did a full sweep, found nothing. I showed them the footage. They said it was probably a glitch or compression artifacting. They told me to get more rest, maybe see a doctor. One of them even laughed. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. And then it got worse. It started happening during the day, the sound of knocking. Things moved around the house. A chair slid out from the table while I was in the shower. My phone would ring with no caller ID, always at exactly 12:47 a.m. I stopped answering, but the voicemails always came through, just heavy breathing. And then the whisper. I'm inside. One day I came home from work and found the back door open. The alarm system hadn't gone off. Nothing looked broken. But on the kitchen floor, in red chalk, someone had written, "You let me in." I moved out 2 days later, packed only what I could carry, left the cameras up, sold the place to an out-of-state investor, never went back. I thought I was safe. New town, new apartment, top floor, no trees, no attic. But last week at 12:47 a.m., my phone rang again. Unknown caller. I didn't answer. The voicemail was the same. I'm inside. When I checked the camera feed, because yes, I installed more, I saw something in the footage from my living room. A figure, tall, barefoot, shirtless, just standing behind the couch, watching me sleep. Story the end. My cousin Maya moved back to our hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, after nearly 10 years living in Dallas. She'd been through a rough divorce and was looking to start fresh with her 7-year-old son, Jamal. I offered to help her find a rental while she looked for something permanent. Eventually, she found a modest 2-bedroom home on a quiet street not far from where we grew up. The place was old but clean. White wood paneling, overgrown hedges, rusting mailbox. One of those houses that looked like it belonged in a 1990s sitcom, except tired, like it had seen better days. It was cheap, too cheap, even for the area. But Maya was on a budget and she needed something fast. The landlord was an older woman named Mrs. Reese who lived 2 houses down. She seemed harmless, although a bit evasive when Maya asked about the home's history. Had a few tenants come and go, she said. People don't stay long. Something about the neighborhood being too quiet for them. That was true. The street was oddly silent at night. No kids, no traffic, barely any porch lights. Maya moved in the first week of August, and I helped her unload boxes and assemble furniture in the sweltering heat. She was upbeat, hopeful even, but I remember she kept glancing at the hallway during the move-in, like something about it unsettled her. Jamal wasn't thrilled. He was quiet, more withdrawn than usual. Maya chalked it up to the stress of the move and the divorce, but I noticed the way he kept clutching his backpack like it was a lifeline. He wouldn't sleep in his own room the first few nights, just curled up next to Maya on the living room couch. A week later, she called me around midnight. "I know it's late," she said, her voice shaking, "but something's not right here." I sat up in bed. "What's going on?" She took a moment. "I heard someone walking in the hallway. Heavy steps, like boots." "You think someone's in the house?" "No, that's the thing. I checked everything. The doors are locked, all the windows shut. I thought maybe it was coming from outside. But the sound, it was in the house, D." "Did Jamal hear it?" "He was asleep, but right after the noise stopped, he sat up and said, 'He's here again.'" That froze me. I told her I'd be over. I live only about 10 minutes away. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The night was thick, the kind of southern humidity that wraps around your skin like a wet cloth. When I pulled into Maya's driveway, the house looked still, but all the lights were on. That uneasy glow of too many lights burning at once, like someone was trying to keep the dark at bay. She let me in, and the moment I stepped through the door, I felt it. A kind of pressure in the air, like the walls themselves were watching. Maya led me to the hallway, nothing unusual at first glance. Just a narrow corridor with creaky floorboards and two doors on either side, one leading to Jamal's room, the other to Maya's. At the far end was a linen closet. She said the footsteps started near her room, walked down the hallway, and stopped at the closet. I checked everything. The attic entrance in the hallway ceiling was sealed. The closet was empty, just shelves with old towels and a mop. There were no signs of forced entry, no open windows, nothing. Still, I stayed the night, dozing on the couch with one eye open. Nothing happened, no footsteps, no sounds. By morning, I felt foolish, but Maya didn't. "I didn't imagine it," she said as I know what I heard. A few days later, she called again. This time, at 3:17 a.m., her voice was ragged. "He's not leaving." "Who?" "The man in the hallway." I nearly dropped my phone. She continued, "He doesn't say anything. He just walks. Every night now. And Jamal, he's talking to someone in his room. I thought maybe it was imaginary, but last night I heard a second voice." I drove over again, heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, Maya looked wrecked. Pale, eyes red. Jamal wouldn't leave his room. He was sitting on the floor, staring at his closet door. I walked in and said, "Hey, buddy, everything okay?" He turned to me and said, "He says you can't help." I tried to stay calm. "Who says that?" Jamal looked back at the closet. The man in the dark. That night, I insisted Maya and Jamal stay at my place. They did. I offered to have someone bless the house, an old pastor my grandma used to know, but Maya said no. She wanted to figure out what this was. "Maybe I'm just going crazy," she whispered, but she wasn't. That same night, while they stayed with me, her home security system sent her a notification. Motion detected in the hallway. We pulled up the app and watched the live feed. There it was. A figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, walking slowly down the hallway, dressed in black, no face visible. He walked to the linen closet and stopped, then turned and looked toward the camera, not just toward the lens, toward us, like he knew we were watching. Then the feed cut to static. Maya screamed. We drove to the house with police. They searched everything. Nothing there. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been inside. But something had changed. Jamal refused to speak for 2 days after that. Just sat silently, eyes empty. On the third night, he finally said, "He said he's going to take someone now." We left town that weekend. Maya stayed with me for a while, tried to break the lease. Mrs. Reese didn't fight it. She just nodded when Maya told her. No apologies. Just a quiet, "Sometimes the house doesn't like being empty." We never went back for the furniture. It wasn't worth it. Months later, I passed by the house, empty. Windows boarded up, yard overgrown. Then I saw a light on in the hallway. I stopped the car, staring. The light flickered once. Then I saw movement. A figure. Tall, still, standing by the linen closet. Just standing, watching. I never told Maya she's doing better now. She moved states, found a new job, got Jamal into therapy. He started drawing again. Sometimes in the margins of his sketches, he draws the hallway. Always the same. Same light, same figure. Sometimes he draws more than one. Story the end. The worst mistake I ever made was ignoring my gut instinct that night. It was a Sunday, mid-November. I had just gotten back from my shift at the clinic around 10:15 p.m. I live alone in a rented house on the outskirts of a small town in Kansas. A quiet place. backed by a stretch of forest that looks peaceful in the daylight but transforms into something else entirely once the sun drops. The town itself is the kind of place people forget. A gas station, 2 bars, and a diner that closes at 3 p.m. sharp. I was exhausted, mentally worn down from 12 hours on my feet, and all I wanted was a shower and to collapse into bed. I parked my car, locked the doors out of habit, and jogged up the front steps. When I opened the door, I immediately felt something was wrong. The air inside was still, not quiet, still, like the house was holding its breath. I remember pausing right on the threshold, key still in the lock. The lamp in the living room was on, casting a soft yellow glow. Everything looked normal. My keys were on the counter, shoes lined up, no mess. Still, I stood there too long. It wasn't until I turned to lock the deadbolt that I saw something small on the ground. A leaf. Brown. Crumbled. Out of place. I always vacuumed the entryway. I bent to pick it up, and there was another just under the table. Then a few more down the hallway. Like a trail. I told myself I must have dragged them in. I left my shoes outside and went to the bathroom. The shower steamed up the room quickly, fogging the mirror. I tried to hum something while I scrubbed off the day. But halfway through washing my hair, I heard something. A soft click, like a door latch. I froze. Water still running, soap in my eyes. I strained to hear anything else. For a full 30 seconds, there was nothing. Then, barely audible over the running water, a creak, a floorboard, just outside the bathroom door. I turned off the water. Silence. I stayed frozen in the shower, heart pounding, every instinct screaming not to move. My towel was just outside the curtain. I waited, listening. Nothing. Then I reached out, pulled the curtain open quickly. No one. I dried off quickly, wrapped the towel around me, and stepped into the hallway. My bedroom door was closed. I never leave it closed. I crept up to it, pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. Hand shaking, I slowly turned the knob and pushed it open. Empty. But the window was unlocked. I hadn't opened it. It had rained earlier that day, and there were muddy streaks on the windowsill. I stood there shivering, towel clinging to me, trying to rationalize. Maybe I forgot to lock it. Maybe wind blew in leaves. Maybe. I shut the window, locked it, and got dressed in a hurry. Then I turned on every single light in the house. Every one. I went from room to room. Nothing disturbed. Nothing broken. No sign anyone had been there, except those leaves. There were more now, in the hallway, by the basement door, and the door was cracked open. It had been shut all week. That door sticks. It never opens on its own. I stood in the hall staring at it, and something in me went cold. My knees nearly buckled from the sudden pulse of dread. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept toward the basement door. It groaned as I pushed it open. The stairs were narrow and steep. I hesitated, then aimed the flashlight down. There, halfway down the stairs, was a bare footprint in the dust. A wet footprint. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I called 911. The dispatcher was calm. Too calm. She asked me to repeat what I'd seen 3 times. Then she said they'd send someone by, but it could be a while. A storm had knocked out power in a neighboring town, and units were spread thin. I sat by the front door, flashlight in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. No one ever came. I stayed awake all night. When daylight finally came, I checked the basement again. The footprint was gone. Not wiped. Gone, like it had never been there. But the leaves were still scattered across the floor. I went to work the next day like nothing had happened. Told myself I was overtired. That stress was playing tricks on me. But it got worse. Every night around midnight, I'd start hearing noises, scraping sounds, soft taps, breathing. Sometimes they were in the walls, sometimes right outside my window. Once I thought I heard whispering coming through the vents. I changed all the locks, boarded up the basement, got a security system. Nothing helped. Then things started moving. A cup I left on the kitchen counter would end up in the sink. My toothbrush was in the fridge one morning, a fork bent in half on the table. I started documenting everything, photos, videos, audio recordings, but whenever I tried to show someone, they saw nothing. Just static, blurry images. One night, the motion detector went off. I checked the app and saw the camera had captured a figure, tall, thin, standing in my hallway, head tilted unnaturally. No face, just a smear, like someone had drawn over it with a wet brush. I blinked and the feed went black. That same night, the front door unlocked itself. I heard the bolt turn, then the knob twist. I ran to the door, pressed my back against it, shake something on the other side, pushed, gently, slowly. I stayed like that for hours. By morning, the door was still locked. I checked the footage again. Nothing. I called in sick. Drove to a motel in the next town over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept expecting the phone to ring or the door to creak open. At 12:03 a.m., someone knocked 3 times. Soft. Precise. I didn't move. After a while, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one. But taped to the outside was a leaf, one of the same dried, cracked leaves from my entryway. I stayed at the motel for 3 more nights, but the knocks kept coming. Always at 12:03 a.m., different rooms, different floors, same knock, same leaf. Then I got a call from my neighbor. She said my lights were on at home, that someone was standing in my bedroom window. I hadn't told anyone I left. I went back. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought I could end it, face whatever was happening. I arrived just before midnight, sat in the driveway. At 12:03 a.m., every light in the house turned off. Then slowly, one by one, they turned back on, room to room, like someone was walking through. I didn't go inside. I drove away. Fast. I moved 2 weeks later. Different state, different everything. But last night, I found a leaf on my windowsill. This morning, the basement door in my new place was cracked open. Story the end. The old house I moved into was supposed to be a fresh start. It was a small 2-story place on the edge of a quiet town in upstate New York, one of those rural places where everybody knows everyone else's business. I found it online, a foreclosure, cheap, but in decent shape. I was tired of city life and wanted to settle somewhere peaceful. The realtor assured me it was a good buy, a nice neighborhood, no problems. The first few nights were uneventful, if a little lonely. The creaks and groans of the old wooden floors were nothing I hadn't heard in other old houses, just reminders of age and settling. But I noticed a strange silence outside, especially at night. No wind, no animals, no distant traffic, just an oppressive quiet. On my 3rd night, just after midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate, pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my bedroom. I pulled back the curtain and peered into the dark corridor. No one there. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, coming closer to my door, then retreating. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe a raccoon on the porch. The next morning, I found muddy footprints by the back door, but no one had been in the house except me. I cleaned them, chalked it up to a neighbor or a stray animal. But the feeling of being watched grew. Over the next week, the footsteps became more frequent and louder. Sometimes I heard whispers, soft, almost unintelligible, when I was alone in the living room. I checked every lock, every window, all secured. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I awoke to a tapping at my bedroom window. I live on the 2nd floor. I crept to the window, flashlight in hand. Nothing outside but the garden, shadows moving with the faint moonlight. Then a shadow darted behind a tree. I slammed the curtains shut and locked the window. I tried telling friends and family, but they brushed it off. Old house paranoia, they said. Then the phone calls started. At exactly 3:03 a.m., my landline would ring. No caller ID, just silence on the other end. I stopped answering after the 3rd time. One morning, I found a note slipped under the front door. No handwriting, just a single sentence typed on a scrap of paper. I see you. Panic set in. I called the local police and asked them to check my house. They found no signs of intrusion, no footprints, no forced entry. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. One evening, I installed a security camera outside the front door. That night, I watched the footage the next morning. At 12:59 a.m., the video showed a figure in a dark coat standing at the edge of the yard. The figure moved slowly toward the house, stopping directly in front of the porch steps. Then it looked up toward the camera and disappeared. I enhanced the image and tried to get a better look at the face. Nothing. Just a blank, featureless silhouette. The next night, I set up a camera inside, facing the hallway outside my bedroom door. At 2:55 a.m., the video recorded the bedroom door creaking open by itself, slowly swinging inward. Then footsteps crossed the hall toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom before retreating. I sat in bed watching it, frozen with fear. I left the house for a few nights, staying with friends. When I returned, the atmosphere was heavier. The air felt thicker, like breathing through water. One night, the footsteps were louder than ever. They paced for what felt like hours. I swore I heard breathing, deep, raspy, coming closer and closer to my bedroom door. Suddenly, the door handle jiggled. I backed away and called the police again. When they arrived, they searched the house, but found nothing. After that, the activity escalated. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered, cold spots moved through rooms. I began having vivid nightmares, dark figures looming, whispers calling my name. One night I woke to a choking sensation. My throat felt constricted, and I couldn't scream. I lay paralyzed, the shadow at the foot of my bed growing larger. Then it vanished. I finally moved out, unable to take another night in that house. Weeks later, I learned from a neighbor that the previous owner disappeared mysteriously. They found the house empty, no sign of him. The realtor hadn't mentioned that. Sometimes, late at night, I still get calls from a blocked number, and when I answer, I hear nothing but breathing. Story, the end. The night I realized I wasn't alone in my own home began like any other. Quiet, ordinary, with nothing out of place. I had moved into a small two-bedroom apartment in a sleepy suburb not long before. It was affordable and the neighborhood was safe enough, or so I thought. The rent was low, the landlord polite, and the neighbors kept to themselves. Perfect for someone like me who worked late hours and just wanted a place to crash. My shift at the hospital ended just before midnight. I was exhausted, my feet aching from standing all day, and all I wanted was to shower and collapse into bed. The streets were empty as I drove home. The only sound, the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. When I pulled into the parking lot, the only other car was a beat-up sedan parked several spaces away. I grabbed my keys and walked to my door, grateful for the cool night air. The apartment was dark and silent when I stepped inside. I flipped on the light and tossed my bag onto the kitchen table. Everything looked normal. I took a quick shower and slipped into bed. The ceiling fan whirred softly overhead as I drifted off, the kind of deep sleep that erases the day's worries. But around 2:17 a.m., I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. A sound, soft, barely perceptible, but definitely there. A scraping noise coming from somewhere in the apartment. I froze, listening. It wasn't the usual creak of the building settling or the hum of the fridge. This was deliberate. I sat up and strained my eyes in the darkness. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a rat in the walls. But then I heard it again. Closer this time. A faint thud, like something heavy being dragged. I grabbed my phone, flipped on the flashlight, and cautiously stepped out of bed. The hallway outside my bedroom was pitch black. I flicked the switch, but the hallway light didn't come on. I groaned. Must be a blown bulb. I moved down the hall, the beam from my phone cutting through the shadows. The living room was empty. The kitchen sink was dry. Nothing seemed disturbed. But as I turned toward the bathroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I was certain I'd left it closed. I stepped closer and pushed it open fully. The bathroom was empty, but there was something on the floor, a thin, black glove. I picked it up carefully. It was cold and damp. I walked back to the bedroom and locked the door behind me. I wanted to believe someone had slipped in while I was in the shower earlier. But there were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no jimmied locks. The front door was locked tight. I sat on the bed, heart racing, clutching the glove. I called the police and explained what I'd found. They arrived within 20 minutes. The officers checked every inch of the apartment. Nothing. No footprints. No fingerprints, no sign of an intruder. I asked if anyone had reported a break-in in the neighborhood. The officer shook his head. They told me to stay with a friend or family member for the night, just to be safe. I agreed. I packed a bag and drove to my best friend's house a few blocks away. The next day, I went back with a locksmith. He replaced all the locks, installed a peephole, and suggested I get a security system. I took all his advice. For 2 weeks, I tried to put it behind me. But the feeling never left. Every night, around 2 a.m., strange things happened. Lights flickered on and off. My phone would ring with no caller ID. Objects moved from where I left them. Once I woke up to find the bedroom window open, despite having locked it myself. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed. One night, the ringing started again, the phone vibrating against the nightstand. I answered. Breathing, heavy, labored breathing. Then a voice, low, distorted, barely human. It whispered, You can't hide. I dropped the phone, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I locked all the doors and windows, pulled the covers over my head, and didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I found a message scratched into the bathroom mirror in condensation. I see you. I wiped it away, hands trembling. I installed cameras inside the apartment. For weeks, nothing unusual appeared on the footage. Then one night, I noticed a shadow moving through the hallway. I watched as a tall figure, hunched and slow, passed by the camera's view. No face, no features, just a dark silhouette. I called the police again, but there was nothing they could do. No forced entry, no footprints, no evidence. I started seeing the figure when I was awake, out of the corner of my eye, standing at the edge of rooms, sometimes near the bedroom door, never making a sound, just watching. One night I woke to the sound of breathing. Right beside my bed, I couldn't move. Then the whisper, "You can't run." The next morning, my bedroom door was scratched with deep gouges, and a new message on the mirror, "We're home." I moved out the following week. I haven't been back since, but sometimes late at night my phone still rings. Unknown caller, heavy breathing on the other end, and a whisper, "I see you." Story the end. It was early 2012 when I moved into the apartment in a modest building on the outskirts of a small town in Ohio. I was working the graveyard shift at a local convenience store, and I needed somewhere cheap and quiet to live. The building was old, a brick structure from the 1950s, with narrow hallways and creaky floors. The neighbors were few, mostly elderly or students, and I hardly saw anyone during the day. The first few nights were uneventful, but the building had this heavy silence that weighed on me. At midnight, everything seemed to stop. No cars, no voices, just a dead quiet that pressed against the windows and settled in the walls. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a faint knock at my front door. It was soft, deliberate, 3 taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. My closest friends lived miles away. I ignored it, thinking it might be one of the other tenants playing pranks. The knocks came again, this time a little louder and faster. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. No one was there. Only a small, folded piece of paper lay on the threshold. I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in neat, typed letters were 3 words, "I'm watching you." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding. I checked the peephole, but the hallway was empty and dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Over the next several nights, the knocking continued. Always 3 taps at irregular intervals, always when I was alone, and always followed by the same chilling note. The notes changed over time. "You can't hide," "I see everything," and finally, "soon." I reported the incidents to building management and local police, but they found no evidence. No fingerprints on the door, no CCTV footage showing anyone near my apartment. One night, I woke up to the sound of breathing just outside my bedroom window. It was heavy, ragged, and close enough to feel the cold breath on the glass. I stayed frozen, watching the window until the sound stopped. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the windowsill, despite it being on the 2nd floor. I moved out less than a week later. Story the end. The old house on Elm Street was one that almost no one dared to enter after dark. It had been empty for years, slowly rotting away, windows boarded up, vines climbing up its sides like fingers trying to choke it. The few who lived nearby whispered rumors, strange noises, shadowy figures glimpsed in broken windows, lights flickering at odd hours. But for me, none of that was reason enough to stay away. I worked the night shift at the local hospital and got off around midnight. On the nights I had no one to pick me up, I would walk home. That route took me past Elm Street, and every time my curiosity gnawed at me. One particular night in late October, the sky was clear but cold, and the street was eerily silent, almost as if the town itself was holding its breath. I was halfway down Elm Street when I noticed something odd. The faint glow of a candle flickered behind the grime-covered window of the old house. My heart quickened. I had never seen any light there before, only the darkness of abandonment. A strange pull drew me closer. I rationalized that maybe someone had broken in, or perhaps someone had moved in secretly. Either way, I had to know. I circled around to the back, where the yard was littered with broken branches and shattered glass. The back door hung slightly ajar, creaking gently in the night breeze. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. stale air mixed with the unmistakable scent of mold and decay. A thin layer of dust coated everything, disturbed only by fresh footprints leading further inside. The house was cold and silent, except for the soft crackle of the candle somewhere upstairs. I climbed the rickety stairs, each step moaning under my weight. The candlelight flickered down the hall from a slightly open door. I pressed my ear to it and heard whispering. Low voices, unintelligible but urgent. Goosebumps rose on my arms. I hesitated, then slowly pushed the door open. The room was small and bare except for a single chair facing a cracked mirror and the candle sitting on the floor. There was no one in the chair, but the whispering stopped abruptly. I strained to listen. The silence was heavier than before. Then I saw it, written in a shaky hand on the mirror, smeared with something dark. "Don't trust the shadows." My breath caught. I wiped my finger across the message to see what the substance was. It was sticky and cold. Blood. Before I could process, a loud bang echoed from downstairs, like something heavy falling. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The candle flickered violently and then went out, plunging me into pitch black. Panic surged as I scrambled toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own, trapping me. I pulled at the door handle frantically, pounding on the wood, shouting for help. The whispering returned, louder, more insistent, filling the room with cold dread. I pressed my back against the door, trying to stay calm, but the voice was chanting something, words I didn't understand, but which felt like they were clawing inside my mind. Then I saw the shadow. It began as a dark silhouette on the far wall, stretching, growing, taking form. It had no clear shape but moved with a fluid, unnatural grace. It seemed to absorb the candlelight, turning the room even darker. My eyes tried to focus, but the more I looked, the more it twisted and writhed like smoke. I could hear it whisper directly now, a voice both everywhere and nowhere. "You came. You saw. Now you stay." A cold hand brushed against my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but no one was there. The shadow reached out again, longer this time, as if trying to pull me into the darkness. I shoved away, heart hammering, and in that moment, the door clicked and creaked open. I didn't wait. I bolted down the stairs, tripping over debris, barely catching myself before falling. I burst out into the night air and didn't stop running until the house was far behind me. At home, I locked every door and window and sat shaking in the corner, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, a product of exhaustion or a nightmare. But when I looked at my hands, I saw dark smudges on my fingers, the same sticky, cold substance I'd wiped from the mirror. The next day, I told a friend about the house and the message on the mirror. She looked pale and said, "That house was the site of a terrible murder years ago. A woman named Clara lived there. One night, she was attacked and killed inside. People say her spirit haunts the place." Curiosity turned to obsession. I couldn't stop thinking about the house, the shadow, the whispering. I returned a few nights later, hoping to find some logical explanation. But the house was different then, quiet, dead silent, no candlelight, no shadows moving in the walls. Weeks passed and strange things started happening around me. At night, I'd hear faint whispers just beyond earshot. Objects in my apartment would be found in places I didn't leave them. My reflection in mirrors sometimes seemed delayed, as if it were watching me with a mind of its own. One night, I woke to find a message scratched into the fog on my bathroom mirror, "Here." I felt watched, even in broad daylight. My sleep became fragmented with nightmares of darkness closing in, hands pulling me down, voices chanting. Friends started avoiding me. They said I looked haunted, eyes sunken and wild. I tried to get help, but doctors found nothing wrong physically. I began to isolate myself, afraid to be alone, yet afraid of others too. One night, as I was about to sleep, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You saw too much. Now you belong." The room grew cold, and the shadows gathered thicker in the corners, creeping closer like living things. I screamed, but no one answered. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was a hand, cold, sticky, like the mirror message, grasping mine from the darkness, pulling me in. When I woke, I was outside the house on Elm Street. The sun was just rising. My clothes were torn, and my skin was scratched and bruised. But worst of all was the feeling that something had followed me out, something that now lurked just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting. No one believed me. The police found no evidence of anyone else being in the house, no candles, no footprints, no message on the mirror. The house was as dead and empty as ever. But I know what I saw. I know what touched me. And I know that the shadows are still waiting, hungry for the next curious soul who dares step inside. Story the end. The clock on the nightstand read 2:43 a.m. when I woke up, drenched in cold sweat. My body was rigid, my breath shallow. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare fading away, but then I heard it. The faintest whisper of something brushing against the window pane. I froze, listening hard. The wind was still. Outside, only the faint hum of the city in the distance. Nothing should have been moving. I live alone in a small apartment on the 10th floor of a building in the city. Nothing fancy, nothing special, just a rented place with cracked tiles and thin walls that let the sounds from neighbors crawl in at night. I've always felt safe here, even at odd hours like this. But not tonight. That whispering sound came again, softer this time, like the scrape of fingernails. My heart pounded in my ears as I forced myself to sit up. The room was pitch dark except for the pale light from the street lamps filtering through the curtains. I didn't want to look at the window, but I knew I had to. Slowly, I peeled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. Nothing. No movement, no shadow, just the empty street below, illuminated by the yellow glow of a single flickering streetlight. I let out a shaky breath and pulled the curtain back. I was about to lay back down when I heard it again. This time, from inside the apartment, a soft creaking from the hallway outside my bedroom door. I live alone. There's no reason for anyone to be here. The door handle rattled once. My blood turned to ice. I didn't want to move or make a sound. The handle rattled again, then silence. My phone was across the room on the kitchen counter. I didn't dare reach for it. Instead, I strained to listen, breath held tight. Then, a barely audible whisper, so soft I wasn't sure I heard it. Help? My head snapped towards the door. No one should be saying that. No one should be here at all. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I forced my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. My feet hit the cold floor, and every hair on my body stood on end. The door to the bedroom was still shut, the handle untouched. I backed into the corner, heart hammering. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Just once. Then everything went black. In that moment, the whisper came again, louder, right beside my ear. Help me. I bolted toward the kitchen, blindly searching for my phone. My fingers found it, trembling as I unlocked the screen and dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, but as I opened my mouth to explain, the call cut out. The screen blinked, no service. My phone had lost signal. I felt a sudden chill crawling up my spine, and when I turned, I saw a shadow by the bedroom door. No, not a shadow. Something darker, more defined. A figure. It was tall, thin, impossibly still. I blinked hard. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there as if waiting. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice barely steady. No response, just that looming silence. I ran past it, grabbed the small kitchen knife I keep in the drawer, more out of instinct than belief it could help, and made my way to the front door. The hallway was empty, no sign of anyone. I turned the lock and opened the door to step outside. The building was silent. The air was thick and cold, unlike the warm summer night it had been moments ago in my apartment. I ran down the stairs, 2 steps at a time, barely noticing the dull thud of my pounding heartbeat. Outside, the street was deserted, the flickering streetlight from below casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I glanced back at the building. The door I had just left was closed tight, no sign of disturbance. Suddenly I saw it. A figure standing across the street, motionless, staring straight at me. The streetlight flickered again, and for a moment I saw its face. Pale, gaunt, eyes blacker than the night itself. Then it disappeared. I called 911 again. This time, the line stayed open. The operator assured me officers were on their way. I stayed on the sidewalk, eyes darting around, heart in my throat. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, 2 police officers arrived. I explained what had happened, my voice shaky but urgent. They searched the building, the floors, every apartment. No signs of forced entry. No one else in the building. They assured me it was probably a prank or someone trying to scare me. But they also told me to stay with a friend or family member that night. I had no one nearby, so I stayed at the police station, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, I called my landlord to ask about the previous tenants. He mentioned that an elderly woman had lived there before me and had died mysteriously in the apartment 2 years ago. Her body had been found after neighbors complained about a foul smell. The police suspected natural causes, but some said she had seemed troubled, hearing voices and seeing shadows in her last days. I asked to see her file. There was mention of her saying she was trapped, calling for help, but no one believed her. That night, I tried to convince myself it was all coincidence, paranoia fueled by loneliness and the night's silence. But the whispers started again, quietly, just beyond the edge of hearing. And sometimes when I'm alone, I see that shadow standing in the corner of my bedroom, waiting. Story the end. The night I will never forget began like any other, or at least it seemed that way at first. I worked as a night security guard for a small independent convenience store on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where few customers came after dark and most nights were boring and uneventful. That night, though, something changed. Something that no one could explain, and that still haunts me years later. It was around midnight when my shift began. The store was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead, and the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator units and the occasional creak of the building settling. The streets outside were empty, cloaked in the thick, almost suffocating silence that descends on small towns when most people are asleep. I went about my routine, checking the doors, counting the cash in the register, scanning the security monitors. Everything was normal. About an hour in, the front door chimed softly. I looked up, expecting maybe a late customer or someone in need, but the monitor showed no one. The door was clearly closed and the sensor indicated no movement. I shrugged it off as a glitch, but the chime rang again, then a third time. I went over to the door to check, peering out into the parking lot. Not a soul. No cars, no movement. The streetlights flickered and cast long shadows over the cracked asphalt. I pressed the button to lock and unlock the door manually, thinking maybe the sensor was stuck. As I did, a faint, barely audible whisper floated through the cold night air, so soft I almost doubted my ears. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out. I froze, heart pounding in the dark. The store plunged into pitch blackness, the hum of electricity gone, replaced by a ringing silence that seemed to fill every inch of space. I fumbled for my phone and switched on the flashlight app. The weak beam illuminated the aisles, but the feeling of unease only grew. I tried calling the store manager, but got no answer. Suddenly, from somewhere deep in the store, I heard a slow, deliberate tapping sound, like fingernails scraping against glass. I shone the light toward the back of the store, near the freezer doors. The tapping continued, rhythmic, unnervingly deliberate. I swallowed hard and moved closer. As I approached, the temperature seemed to drop sharply. My breath fogged in the cold air, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The freezer door was slightly ajar. I reached out and pushed it closed, but the tapping didn't stop. Instead, it moved, now coming from the far corner of the store, near the storage room door. I hesitated, then shone the light toward the storage room. The door was cracked open, a dark void beyond. I called out, "Hello? Hello? Is someone there?" But only the tapping answered. It was coming from inside the storage room. Summoning every bit of courage, I stepped inside. The narrow space was cluttered with boxes, old shelving, and cleaning supplies. The air smelled stale, mixed with something metallic. The tapping stopped as soon as I stepped in. I scanned the room with my flashlight, finding nothing unusual. I exhaled, relieved, and turned to leave. Then the door slammed shut behind me. I yanked at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic began to rise. I pounded on the door, yelling for help, but the thick walls swallowed my voice. I tried calling again, but there was no signal inside the cramped room. The flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. My hands felt along the walls, searching for anything to hold on to. Suddenly, a cold breath brushed my ear. I spun around, shining my dead phone screen as best I could, but saw nothing. Then I heard a whisper, clear as day, but coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You shouldn't be here." I scrambled to the door again, banging and screaming. Then a faint light appeared, at first a pinprick, then growing into a soft glow. The door unlocked with a click, and I rushed out into the main store, slamming the door behind me. I turned on the emergency lights, and the store hummed back to life. But something was wrong. The cash register drawer was open, empty. The store safe was wide open too, something I was sure I had locked earlier. And the surveillance monitors showed static. I tried to reset the system, but the screens flickered and displayed a single chilling image. A figure standing just outside the front door, barely visible, its face obscured by shadows. The figure didn't move but seemed to stare directly at me. I was frozen, unable to tear my eyes away. Then the figure vanished. I called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They searched the store and surrounding area, but found no one. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints. The surveillance footage was corrupted and unusable. They told me it was probably a prank or malfunction, but I knew better. That night, I didn't sleep. The whispering echoed in my mind, and I kept glancing at every shadow, expecting to see that figure lurking just beyond my vision. Over the next days, strange things continued happening. I received calls with static and faint whispers. Objects in my home were moved or missing, and sometimes I'd find messages scratched into surfaces, sometimes on my bathroom mirror, sometimes on my car windows, words like leave or watching. I stopped working that job. The store eventually closed down, but my nightmare didn't end. One night, I woke up to a feeling of someone watching me. The air was heavy and cold. I looked toward my bedroom window and saw a dark silhouette standing outside, barely visible in the streetlight. I blinked, and it was gone. After that, I moved to another town, changed my phone number, and avoided anything remotely connected to that store or the area. But the whispers still follow me, sometimes just at the edge of hearing. I don't know what it was or what it wanted. All I know is that some things hide in the dark, waiting for the right moment to reach out, and sometimes they find you. Story, the end. It was just past midnight when I got the call. I work overnight security for a small, family-owned storage facility on the outskirts of town, a place where most people leave their junk and old furniture, rarely visited after dusk. The usual routine is mind-numbingly dull. A couple of slow rounds on foot, checking the gates, making sure no one's broken in, then sitting in my little guard shack watching the flickering security monitors until dawn. That night was different. My shift started at 11 p.m., just like any other. The night was unusually quiet. The usual distant hum of cars on the nearby highway was missing, and the wind was still. I shrugged it off and did my first round. The facility's old chain-link fence creaked faintly as I walked past it, but nothing seemed out of place. The gate was locked tight, no footprints in the gravel. Back in the shack, I monitored the cameras, all static views of rows of metal storage units. At 12:15 a.m., the screens suddenly went black. I cursed under my breath, thinking the old system had finally given out. I rebooted the monitors and waited for the feed to return. It flickered back to life, but one camera was missing its view, the one covering the northeast corner near the empty lot. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The air was thick and cold, biting at my skin despite the mild summer evening. I walked toward the fence, the beam cutting through the darkness. I heard something, a faint rustling, like dry leaves being pushed aside. Then I saw it. A figure crouched just beyond the fence, barely visible. The flashlight beam caught on something reflective, a pair of eyes staring back at me. I froze. My heart thudded hard. "Hey!" I called out, voice louder than I intended. The figure didn't move. I shined the light directly at it. It was a man. Ragged clothes, wild hair, face shadowed but gaunt. He spoke, voice trembling and low. "Please, I need help." Something about the desperation in his tone made me lower my flashlight slightly. "What's wrong? How did you get in here?" He shifted nervously. I don't know where I am. I've been running." The hairs on my neck stood up. It felt wrong. "Listen, this is private property. You can't stay here. If you need help, call 911. His eyes darted around. "No, they're after me. They'll find me." I stared, suddenly uneasy. "Who's after you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he suddenly scrambled through a hole in the fence I hadn't noticed before and disappeared into the dark lot. I hesitated, then radioed the office. "Possible trespasser on the northeast corner. Fence damaged." My supervisor's voice crackled back, calm but firm. "Stay put and observe. Don't engage." I nodded, feeling the weight of silence press down as I returned to the shack. For the next hour, I scanned the cameras, but the feed from the northeast corner remained offline. I called the police non-emergency line to report the damage and the trespasser's description, but no patrol cars arrived. It was the middle of the night, and they were stretched thin. Suddenly, my radio beeped. It was a garbled call, barely audible over static. Help! Trapped! Please! I grabbed the radio, pressing the talk button. Who is this? Are you okay? No response. Only the faint sound of sobbing, then static. I turned off the radio, heart racing. The facility was supposed to be empty, except for me. At 2 a.m., I decided to check the northeast corner again, flashlight and radio in hand. I noticed the hole in the fence was larger than I'd thought, just enough for a person to slip through. I stepped through, the gravel crunching underfoot. The lot was a wasteland. Overgrown weeds, scattered trash, and shadows that seemed to twitch beyond the beam. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy. Coming from the far end of the lot, I called out, voice steady but loud. Hello? Are you out here? Silence. Then the footsteps stopped. The beam of my flashlight landed on something lying on the ground. A backpack, torn and covered in dirt. I bent down to pick it up. Inside, I found a worn notebook, pages filled with frantic scribbles and drawings. The handwriting was shaky, words crossed out and rewritten. The last entry read, "They're watching me from the shadows. I don't think I can hide anymore. If someone finds this, please don't follow." I felt a chill ripple through me. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around, flashlight darting. Nothing but darkness. I hurried back through the hole in the fence, locking it behind me. Back at the shack, I tried the radio again. This time, no interference, but no response either. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered and the monitors died completely. I sat there in the dark, the hum of the city still missing. I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. Then, from outside, a soft tapping began, faint, rhythmic, like fingers drumming on glass. I approached the window, peering out, but saw only shadows. The tapping grew louder, then stopped abruptly. I stood frozen. A whisper brushed past my ear. "Help me." I spun around, knife in hand, but the shack was empty. Minutes later, the power surged back on. The cameras flickered to life, but the northeast corner camera was black again. I called it in and left the facility early, too shaken to stay. The next morning, the police inspected the hole in the fence. They found no signs of anyone hiding in the lot. The backpack and notebook were gone. My supervisor told me the storage facility was built on what used to be an old asylum's grounds. The asylum was shut down decades ago after reports of patients disappearing without explanation. I never returned for another shift. Weeks later, I kept hearing the whisper, "Help me," every time the clock struck midnight. And sometimes in the corner of my vision, I'd catch a shadow watching from the darkness. I never found out who that man was or what they wanted, but I know I was never alone that night. Story the end.